Amit and Michael, thank you so much for joining us today as we begin this roundtable conversation about maritime cybersecurity. Can you say a few words about your position and current role?
Okay, so if I go first, then my name is Amit Basu. I'm the CIO CISO at International Seaways. International Seaways is headquartered in New York City and one of the largest ocean transportation company of the world, focusing on primarily energy transportation. I am working with Maritime IT now close to 30 years, and beginning with the late 90s, early 2000s, pioneered a lot of new digital technologies in the maritime, including satellite-based data communication, data replication, putting on actual internet-based systems on board, followed by the cloud era, putting on the high-speed internet with cloud-based systems, and then came the challenges of the cybersecurity. See, the challenges on onboard cybersecurity is unique because of the lack of skills on board and the intertwining of the OT and IT over the same internet connections, together with the crew personal usage. So for the last several years, I am focusing on trying to create a cyber resilient architecture on board our ships, how to keep them safe and secure for both the cargo, the vessel, and most importantly, for the crew on board.
And my name is Mike Wilkes. I'm a adjunct professor. I teach cybersecurity at NYU and IT risk management at Columbia University. One of the things that I do in the maritime sector is I'm a part of the Area Maritime Security Committee for the Coast Guard for Sector New York. And so I've been a part of tabletop exercises on Staten Island, or sector-wide, raising the MARSEC level. And I was there as an observer, given my academic and practical experience as a CISO and infrastructure leader for the last 30 years, to help the Coast Guard and DHS learn how to deal with cyber and cyber kinetic disruptions. One of the other things I guess I like to mention when I introduce myself is that I used to be the CISO for Marvel, and it was my job to keep Iron Man safe, and so that's my tagline. I like to explain, of course, if you saw Endgame or Infinity War, you know what happened after I left. I wasn't there to protect Iron Man anymore. But I've been working in the industry for many years, as has, I have the gray hair going back to the .com bubble, and where I was leading teams that gave birth, to Starbucks.com, gave them their first website, working in San Francisco during the .com, It was the roaring 20s of our generation, right? Lots and lots of possibility and stock options. And but I also launched PlayStation for the PS2 and Macy's and Blockbuster and lots of other things. Lived and worked in Amsterdam for 11 years. So I have a heart of, sailing and the maritime. And that's one of the reasons that I've been involved with the MTS ISAC. I gave a presentation at their summit last fall on third-party risk management in Miami, and I spoke and gave a session at the Port of the Future conference in Houston a couple of years ago. So I've written a lot of white papers and case studies because I'm a member of the World Economic Forum, working in the Quantum Security Working Group, the Oil and Gas Resilience, Cyber Resilience Working Group, and also U.S. Advanced Manufacturing. So that's a little bit about myself and some of the work that I've done. And I think critical infrastructure and the convergence of OT and IT, they're really different, attack shapes. When you think about it, the life cycle of OT is 20, 30 years. I just heard someone talking the other day about decommissioning a ship that was built at the end of World War II, and it had a pneumatic control system, right? So you don't hack that, with electronics and IP and TCP protocols. It's a different attack surface and different life cycles. And so I think the worst thing that we can do right now would be to just slap an IP address on ship-to-shore cranes, and open it up to the internet. We need to be very careful about how we segment these networks. and how we deal with, some of the hybrid attacks that maybe land first on a laptop as patient zero, but then quickly pivot into the OT infrastructure, and they live on a printer, or they live on a thermometer in a fish tank, or they live on the cameras, right, which have embedded Linux systems. And so I think one of the biggest risks to OT right now is actually the hubris of IT coming in and trying to tell them what to do.
Thank you for this amazing introduction. I think we're a very extremely qualified panel in session. So as we begin, I guess the world has changed, not just since the end of the World War II, but I guess in the last 10 years, I think from a very connected world with trading partners, I think some of the geopolitical flare-ups of recent days expose some of the risks, specifically around the trading routes. More specifically, what's happening in the Red Sea right now with attacks by Yemen rebels. What is your take on how this change in geopolitical climate, how this impacts maritime security, and what are the implications specifically for cybersecurity?
Go, Mike.
Well, I guess one of the major things to take account of is that the class societies, for example, they have the E26 and E27 rules for building ships right now, right? And they just introduced the idea of network segmentation firewalls. And so the class societies are not a leading entity, they're a following entity. And so they're requiring, as of I think July of this year, all ships will have to meet these new requirements that have been documented. But of course, there's no mention of zero trust architecture. There's no mention of some of these other things. So it's going to be another 5-10 years before those things get their way into the actual, build and implementation and launch of these vessels, right? Whether it's large yachts or it's commercial container ships or like you mentioned, the energy transportation fleets. And so I think it's interesting to think that we're going to be fighting a trailing kind of technological battle, and it may be possible. Some organizations are foresightful enough, right? Foresighted enough to be able to put network sniffers, right, onto their fleet. I believe it's Carnival, for example. They have something like 92, vessels in their fleet, and they just recently deployed, a network capability to be able to have real-time data coming across the entire fleet. It took them many years, over COVID, to get on all these ships and to find the closet, that contains the switch that they want to put a network tap on to be able to observe all the traffic, right? And that's your first step. If you can't observe what is happening, you can't measure it, baseline it, and then do anomaly detection. So you can't tell if the ship is behaving poorly because it's 30 years old and needs to be serviced, and is having propulsion problems or having a power outage like we saw with the Dali hitting the Francis Scott Key Bridge, or if it's a cyber attack. And so I think OT can be quite fragile. If you run an Nmap scanner against some of these assets, they fall over, right? I've built energy management systems that control power plants when I lived and worked in Holland. And these systems and the protocols they speak, they are not designed, to be exposed to, malicious traffic. They expect everything to be very calm. You've heard the phrase batten the hatches, right? Well, in cyberspace, there's never a time when you don't have the hatches battened, right? There is no smooth sailing period, right? You're always going to be fighting, attacks from nation states, from organized crime. And now we have to contend with bored teenagers because of, large language models and other types of advances in machine learning. We actually see, bored teenagers as a new category of threat that have been elevated to the level of nation state threat actors, groups like Lapsus, for example, that sometimes they attack things just for the lulls. They're not doing it because they want ransom or because they want to disrupt, a political country's, capabilities, to respond. And so I think what's happening, geopolitically is a return actually to the dominance of the seas and certain choke points that exist, the Straits of Gibraltar. In Singapore, for example, you have major undersea cables, that are critical to the communications network in the region. And so there's just an increasingly interconnectedness and dependency. And the way I like to talk about it in my lectures at NYU and at conferences at Black Hat and SANS and Gartner are that it's called systemic risk. Sufficiently complex systems have an emergent property that's not embedded in any particular node of the network, but it has to do with the interconnectedness and the density of these connections. And they behave in ways that we don't expect. You have cascade failures, of systems, like what happened with Texas in that cold storm that went through, right, and almost put the entire state of Texas back in the Stone Age for 6 years, or at least 6 months to a year, because they had what would have been called a black start event. I think they were like 30 seconds away from a cascade failure of the entire grid in Texas. And so I think these are the kinds of lessons. I'm not making fun of Texas because of this. I'm saying if a malicious state threat actor wanted to destroy critical infrastructure, unfortunately, it's terribly easy for them to do that right now. And so how can we quickly get our ability to observe, detect, and respond? And I've worked with folks at Dragos and Rob Lee, the founder and CEO. He's involved in the World Economic Forum working groups as well. He's doing great things to help shore up, the capabilities of energy and water and other critical infrastructure sectors. But I think maritime is the last one to the table, the last one that anyone's really paying attention to, even though it's like 80% of the world's commerce travels over the seas. So it's really critical to make sure that we build appropriate controls, and not just take like the NIST 800/53 and think that can be mapped into OT. You have a different set of critical controls for OT infrastructure. And the geopolitical instabilities are just making it even more complex for us to figure out why is something failing? Why has a service or a capability been disrupted? And so I think it'll require a lot of collaboration, with the information and threat intelligence sharing communities, for example.
Thanks, Michael.
Yep. So yeah, I'll pick up where Michael left. Really, he covered it really extremely well from all the angles, but I'll just pick up where he ended, telling why maritime is always the last. One of the key reasons is also maritime is always, at least in my 30 years, what I'm watching is a technologically laggard among all the domains. Okay. When I started 30 years back, the primary communication between ship to shore was still used to be telex. And till 10 years back, maybe little 12 years back, majority of the ships used to have a standalone network only with a dial-up connectivity through the satellite. So cyber risk on the ships used to be minimal because they are standalone network. Nobody can connect there. Ship themselves only can initiate the connection outside. There is no automatic connection from outside to the ship. So there is no cyber risk there. But over the last 10, 12 years, situation have changed quite a bit. Primary reason being the advent of broadband internet communications from the ship, starting with the VSATs, followed by 4G, and nowadays Starlink is creating almost a new horizon on the ships, really. All ships crews want Starlink on their ships just because that improves their quality of communication immensely. So with that communication availability, the companies also have seen the benefits of using technology, more specifically internet-based technology on board the ships. So we have seen a really large amount of technology being deployed on board ships over the last 5, 6, 7, maybe 8 years time, from 2015, 2016 onwards. We have the OT systems we keep on talking. Operational technology are the core of the ships. Those were always there. What changed then? Those systems are getting now connected to the internet. Why? Primary reasons, the manufacturers are requesting the connection so they can better support those systems. They can deploy their upgrades a lot easier. They can train the crew on board testing those systems. So that's happening. Those OT systems, the key primary OT systems are being connected to the internet. We are also getting systems on board which are directly connecting to the cloud for data collection purpose. Because again, Mike mentioned, If I cannot measure, I cannot improve or I cannot get better. So we as the owner want the data from the ship. We are under tremendous pressure from the decarbonization and the sustainability front. So to show any improvement there, we need to collect data from all aspects of the ship to see where I am burning the fuel, where I am doing the more emissions, where I can reduce. So all those systems are now connected to the internet. So on top of that, as I mentioned briefly, crews are obviously who are sailing on the ship from 3 months, 6 months, sometimes even 9 months at a stretch. They are definitely more tech savvy nowadays. They carry their own personal devices and they demand the internet connectivity to connect to their family, to communicate, to know what's going on outside the world, just that being sailing on an island on the ocean. And they are also using the same internet connection. So the same internet connectivity, one single pipe out of the ship is being used for the IT systems that transferring data, the OT systems where the external vendors may be connecting into the OT machinery on the ship, and the crews are doing their own personal internet usage, browsing, connect social media, and securing that. Again, I'm just paraphrasing some of the things Michael said, segmenting the ship. Okay, it's an absolutely critical on board to have a very thick walls between these three territories. It is very important to do some amount of monitoring on board. Again, we do not have, we're very clear, we are having maybe in a larger ship also. Again, I'm not talking about the cruise ships. Cruise ships are on a different category of animal in our industry. But even the largest container ship or the largest oil tanker sails with maybe 20, 25 people, no more than that crew-wise. So there is no IT expertise, forget about IT security expertise on board. The entire thing is supported remotely from the shore. So if there is any anomaly in the behavior of the network on board, by the time somebody from the shore can know about it and do something about it, it can be already very late. So creating some sort of a monitoring on board the ships. Again, that is where I will use the term AI again loosely, but using the latest digital technologies, we can definitely have a lot better monitoring on board, which can create a baseline of the behavior on the network and the all sorts of system access on board, and then create alerts based on any anomalies that can it detect. Again, the machine learning technologies are very good at it. So that is a perfect use case for that technology on board ships. Why we need that? Again, we cannot forget that certain parts of world, maybe even 95% of all the supply chain is controlled on water. Overall in the world, over 80% is controlled on water. So why do you think these Yemeni rebels are against those ships passing through their channel? Why do you think the Hormuz Straits are always under various confrontations? Because if I can stop that passage of ships on that channel, the world supply chain would be affected. People will notice, people can be focused on either helping their causes or solving their problem. So the geopolitical pressure, coming back to your primary topic, the geopolitical tensions around the world is not only creating other kind of issues in our industry, especially in the maritime, but cyber also playing a major role there. Because in this war, especially in last couple of wars that the world is witnessing for the last several years, I think cyber is almost being used there as another channel of attack. Okay, and all the countries are doing that. So even though we may not be reading about it because some of it is happening under disguise, it is happening and not being publicized, but definitely the risk on board the ships. There's some of the risk, like a lot of the ships now, it's just like we drive the cars, they also depend on their GPS to navigation. Nobody really gets trained anymore using the manual charts or looking at the stars to navigate the ships. They're navigating the ships using the GPS. And I think it has been repeatedly demonstrated, spoofing those GPS is a fairly an easy task to do it even from a distance. And there are definitely instances that happen over the last several years where ships' GPS have been spoofed and either just to hurt them. Suddenly one ship, there was a couple of days, a few years back, where around 20 ships in that area, in the Black Sea area, figured them one fine day, their position showing they are actually on land somewhere. So that was just a threat. It was not did any damage to them, just to scare them off. But in the last few years, there are claims by United States friendly countries that some of the ships that was captured there, telling those ships has violated certain countries' territories, those ships' GPS actually spoofed to misguide them to certain countries' territory and then captured them to tell, hey, you entered my country. So these kind of threats are definitely increasing, and the regulations currently we have to do a strong cybersecurity practices on board the ships around the world, I don't think they are very uniform across the world yet. IMO has certain things they have done. They did in the whole middle of the COVID in 2021. IMO started set of IMO regulations on cybersecurity. But if you go through them, they're extremely rudimentary. They pretty much, we had in offices maybe that kind of security controls 30 years back, if not even more. That kind of thing they're telling to do at this point on the ships, and leaving a lot of that to kind of people's good sense. BIMCO, working with several maritime kind of organizations, has came out with a framework on board cybersecurity. Okay, again, it's not a requirement, it's a recommendation. Class society, Michael mentioned, all the class societies, ABS, DNV, Lloyds, they all have huge cyber divisions. But that's their, I call them profit-making arms. They're using them to really make money from the ship owners rather than doing it at a ground level when a ship is being built, part of the classification society certification, doing in the cyber requirements from that point. How the network, are they telling how the shipboard's network should be segregated? What kind of firewall should be in place? What kind of firewall rules should be implemented? There is no such thing from them. You pay them money, they will come and do your assessment and then consult with you to maybe do some work with you. But why it is not there in the classification society, the initial class, when they are giving the certification to the ship to be sailworthy. So the lot has to be done in this industry yet, because also there are so many different countries involved. Okay, ship sails out of using the flags on all sorts of countries. So those are the challenges really, but things are happening. So we are a US public company, so we are governed by the SEC guidelines, United States Coast Guard recommendations and guidelines. So we are doing a lot of things on our ships. But a one ship, two ship owner from another outside countries, they may not be that prepared. So the bad guys also know which ships to attack and which one can be more vulnerable. So there's a lot to be done in this industry to cater to those, against those threats posed by the strong nation state actors when there is a geopolitical tension to safeguard our ships.
Yeah, I think you mentioned the GPS spoofing, also the AIS spoofing.
Yes, exactly.
The AIS spoofing, is a way for ships to avoid
the tracking of this. Yep.
And they can violate sanctions, for example. So you can have a visual on a ship in Venezuela that's loading up oil, right, or unloading oil, depending. And if you check the AIS system, right, and the tracker, it's supposed to be in like Trinidad and Tobago or something, right? And so I think that's one of the challenges. A lot of the protocols are very trusting, in their assumptions about how they'll be used. And of course that gets violated by the threat actors. There is one thing though, I kind of harshed a little bit on regulatory being trailing, but there is one notice of proposed rulemaking with the Coast Guard for Title 33 of the CFR, which the Coast Guard has out now for comments and should be putting them together by the fall, which is to require facilities of a certain size to have a CISO and to do tabletop exercises and to do annual, risk assessments. And these are no longer guidelines. These would become requirements. So of the roughly 12,000, at least in the US that are under the MTSA regulatory requirements, there's at least 3,000, 4,000, that are going to have CISOs. And that's going to be a useful thing, right? They're leveling up. And it's going to take a while to get all those CISOs trained, because people that are the facility security officer, the FSO, can become the CISO, even though they spell it CYSO. It's a strange, DHS, decision to not call it CISO. But anyway, the idea is that they can be this, but they need to have expertise. They need to have training. And so I think there's going to be a need to bring IT people gracefully into OT defense, and also cross-skill and upskill, of course, some of the OT people in some of these IT attack vectors. So I think it's not all gloom and doom. There are some, signs of hope and progress, but it's very slow going.
Certainly, and now that we covered that, I was just wondering, we did talk about how fast the world is changing, whether from geopolitical standpoint or from the technology standpoint, but I think the velocity of this technological change is accelerating, specifically whether it's AI, quantum computing. So this, coupled with more adversarial nature of relationships of different power brokers in different countries, I think it's going to amplify some of those challenges. What are your thoughts on how this uptick in innovation and technological change will impact maritime security in your view?
I think I briefly, sorry, I'll go first, Michael, if you don't mind. So I think I briefly touched in my previous discussion also, Misha, that definitely for the last, I would say 7-8 years, if not around that time, my memory goes it right, there are definitely digitalization on board ships have increased drastically. Okay, we are seeing, and that has to do with the high-speed internet connectivity and some of the technologies that's coming up that are definitely helpful to the maritime. Like things like where it allows me do the digital twins kind of technology, where it allows me to simulate the machineries on board ships on a outside to simulate the problem and try to solve the problems rather than trying to fly and technician on board. Then obviously artificial intelligence has to come into the play, because it's not only the just generative AI, but things like on ships, I think most important use case of artificial intelligence are the robotics and the RPA. Robotics are definitely, there are still a lot of manual jobs are done on board ships that are outright dangerous. Okay, the things like the hull cleaning, things like the painting when they do the outdoor painting on the ship sails outside during the ocean, the tank cleanings where they put in literally a guy inside those tanks to clean those tanks. Those kind of things, robotics can definitely make it everything really. It can make it safe, it can make it more efficient, it can make it maybe even better. RPAs can be also, that simple software automation can make life a lot more efficient on board ships. And then coming to the simple things like NLM, the natural language capabilities of AI. So the shipping is really a multicultural industry. We have crews from all over the place. They're calling in to the ports in different countries. So the multilinguality of the shipping or crew communications, that's a huge thing. When the crews communicate with those other countries, a lot of places, I'll tell from my personal experience, at least several ships that I have visited, we sometimes go and check the computers on random, telling that what kind of software they may have installed without taking permission of that. And invariably on those ships, wherever there is a non-English speaking crew, you will find a English language translator software installed on all the computers. Okay, because English is not, a lot of them are not very comfortable in English. That's not their first language. They're not trained in that language, but they need to communicate to the office. They need to communicate to the shore. And NLM can play a huge role in that to make them more efficient. So the technology is coming. Technology is definitely coming on board ships. I also mentioned on the security front, there can be definitely the behavioral analysis part of AI can play a big role. We're already doing it. We are doing some exercise on that for the last few years on board our ships. So technology will make a difference. It has to. Shipping to survive, shipping to become more sustainable, shipping to become more competitive, technology will play a big role, because shipping is not going to go away. Shipping is still one of the mainstays of the global supply chain. So technology will be there, but the more technology we introduce, there will be more attack surface, and we need to maintain that attack surface, keep it safe, because our adversaries are also looking for opportunities to attack that. Because they're definitely, as of today, cyber attacks are purely a economic industry, fine? There is no longer a hacking for fun. It is purely an organized industry that is hacking targeted organizations to make economic gains. And the ships, be it a container ship carrying those thousands of containers, or be it a oil tanker like ours carrying thousands of tons of crude oil or petroleum products, they are a good target. You have seen from those small Somalian pirates itself, how they can make millions with a small dinghy and few guns. They can take a big tanker captive and make millions. So the cyber attackers can do better than that. Definitely there are ways to make money, and they will target that, and it's our job to be, again, what we call today is the shift left security. We cannot think about those digital technologies first and think about security later. As we plan every single digital project on board our ships, we need to think about what kind of new risks, threats they will pose, and plan for security, design the security right from the beginning of the project.
Yeah, I think the fall convention has the maritime single window, right, which became effective in January. And this is part of the digitization of the maritime sector. But it also generates risk. If you think about it, the attack, I think it was, when was it? In July of last year, the port of Nagoya had a ransomware attack, and they hit what's called NUTS, the Nagoya Port Unified Terminal System. And this basically stopped Toyota from shipping any cars, right? And it was a false flag operation by one threat actor pretending to be the Russians. And so they took over the printers and they printed out messages saying, "We are Lockbit. You have been ransomed by the Russians." But really, if you look under the hood, it was not the Russians. It was another threat actor. And I believe most people understand it was the Chinese testing the defenses of Japan for the day when they decide to invade Taiwan. And that's going to be an interesting event, probably in the next year or two. And how is the world going to respond? Will they be distracted by a bunch of sleeper cells and a bunch of backdoors that have been installed throughout, critical infrastructure in the U.S. and elsewhere to keep us from responding to that event? And maybe Taiwan will say we're okay with it. They'll maybe even vote, to be a part of China. But what is that going to do to the global supply of semiconductors? The U.S. will probably need to go in and destroy some of those fabrication capabilities because they don't want the Chinese to have it. And so that's going to set back AI and crypto mining, globally, because the price of compute is going to go through the roof if we have a shortage of semiconductors because of that geopolitical event, which most people I've talked to in the national defense sector believe that it's imminent, right? And that it's going to happen. So, but I think that like I said, the rush to digitalization has an environmental impact, obviously, for efficiencies and, better logistics and better efficiencies of use of different fuels. But it also comes with, like Amit said, it comes with a risk and exposure. And if you don't put a DDoS protection in front of your NUTS system in Nagoya, then it's quite easy for someone to just take over a bunch of Peloton treadmills and do an amplified DDoS attack against you. And, what are you going to do? You can't have any kind of containers going in and out. The port is shut down through a cyberkinetic kind of attack. So I think there's a lot of challenges, like we've mentioned, I think, ahead. And it's going to require a lot more threat intelligence sharing through the communities, whether that's through some of the societies, and organizations that we've mentioned, the IMO. But we can't really expect them to be leading. We kind of need the private sector to lead the way and make that public-private academic partnership, that three-way partnership, be much more productive, but led by the private sector. It can't be led by public sector. They're just not on top of it.
Certainly. Well, it seems the bigger role that technology plays in our lives, both on personal level, on a corporate level, on a state level, the bigger the attack surface. And I think this will, the amount and the scope of challenges, it's only going to increase in the future as we're becoming more and more dependent on this technology, and as the world, even though now without challenges, becoming even more interconnected. I thank you, but just to be conscious of time, I'd like to thank you both for contributing to this roundtable today. Where can people find you? For the listeners, what's the best way to connect?
My handle on most systems, whether it's Twitter, aka X, or LinkedIn, is Eclecticus. I've adopted the mantle Professor Eclecticus, which is sort of something related to my Marvel superhero work previously as well. But I think that the best way to reach is on LinkedIn. I've got a bunch of connections there, and I publish a lot of thought pieces, as well as sharing risks and, of course, lessons learned from events like the Change Healthcare ransomware attack in the healthcare sector. What are the lessons learned for the rest of us, from that merger and acquisition oversight? Because I think it was what United Healthcare Group owns Optum. Optum bought Change, and Change Healthcare hadn't gotten around to doing multi-factor auth on all of their endpoints, and that's how they had been hit with ransomware. So I think a little bit better due diligence in M&A would go a long way in many industries right now.
For sure, low hanging fruit. Absolutely. Amit?
Same here, the LinkedIn would be the best way, Misha. I'm available on LinkedIn, Amit Basu. So that would be the best way to connect, and I would be happy to chat, because again, as you mentioned, the more we collaborate on threat intelligence, the more we see something. If somebody else has already done it, there's no point to reinventing the wheel there, and vice versa. Our adversaries are a lot better connected than I think we are. So more we collaborate, more we talk around our ways of doing things, we all will benefit.
Absolutely. Well, thank you both. Thank you so much.
Yeah.